Molly was a thoughtful, sweet-natured, caring, inquisitive, selfless, beautiful individual. Although a few words cannot possibly encapsulate our wonderful girl.
Molly, a cherished daughter and sister, was just 14 when she took her own life. Soon after, her father opened her email account on the family computer, and a door into what he described as an online ghetto with no escape. Instagram and Pinterest bombarded his child, suffering from depression, with what he called a daily drip feed of hopelessness. Social media helped kill my daughter, he told an inquest last week. Today, he was vindicated. The coroner, Andrew Walker, said he couldn't safely conclude that Molly had died as a result of suicide. He said instead that she died as a result of an act of self-harm while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online content. Now, this is the first time ever a court has said that a social media company, in this case Meta and Pinterest, has contributed to the death of a child. On leaving the court, Mr. Russell appealed to those who, like Molly, are struggling with their mental health.
I just want to say, however dark it seems, there is always hope. And if you're struggling, please speak to someone you trust or one of the many wonderful support organisations rather than engage with content online that may be harmful.
It's been a 5-year battle for Molly's family, in part because Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, repeatedly refused to disclose the posts that she was looking at. This inquest allowed us to see them for the very first time. Posts so distressing, a psychiatrist analysing them for the coroner said they'd caused him to lose sleep. Videos and images depicting self-harm and suicide, set to pop music and, in the coroner's words, romanticising harm to young people. It was moments after watching a series of these that Molly researched the method with which she would later end her life. Thousands of depressive posts, many encouraging her not to seek help from people in the real world. Both tech firms were forced to fly in Silicon Valley executives to testify at the inquest. Molly's family said Pinterest had engaged sincerely and respectfully while taking steps to learn lessons. Meta's head of health and well-being policy only once and very reluctantly apologised to the family for a small amount of content she said violated their policies at the time.
We've heard a senior Meta executive describe this deadly stream of content the platform's algorithms pushed to Molly as safe. If this demented trail of life-sucking content was safe, my daughter Molly would probably still be alive.
You talked about corporate culture on display in the courtroom, and I wonder, do you have any faith that Pinterest or Meta will make their platforms safe for children as a result of this inquest?
All the platforms have taken some steps to make their platforms safer. I think those steps are tiny, and I think that globally dominant platforms with huge budgets can move much faster.
Following the coroner's conclusion, Meta and Pinterest both said they'd consider the coroner's report, Pinterest saying they were committed to making ongoing improvements to ensure their platform was safe for everyone, and Meta that they were committed to ensuring that Instagram is a positive experience for everyone, particularly teenagers. The online safety bill, which will introduce stricter controls over tech firms, is set to return to Parliament before the end of the year. It had been paused by the government over free speech concerns. Today, Molly's father saved the last word for her.
It's thank you, Molly, for being my daughter. Thank you.
Well, tonight, Prince William commented on the case, saying no parent should have to endure what Ian Russell and his family have been through. Online safety for our children and young people needs to be a prerequisite, not an afterthought. Well, with me now is Beeban Kidron, a peer who chairs the 5 Rights Foundation, an organisation which campaigns for online child safety, and Fraser Nelson, who's editor of The Spectator magazine, and he's written about his concerns that elements of the government's online safety bill will lead to censorship. Beeban Kidron, first of all, this is an absolute tragedy. for Molly's family and everyone who loved her. An extraordinary ruling from the coroner today. What, if anything, will it change?
I think it was an extraordinary ruling, and I do have to start this by paying tribute to Ian Russell and the whole Russell family, because what they've endured is a battle of 5 years long to get the information that we've seen for the first time in open court, what children up and down the country, all across the globe, are seeing in their bedrooms and in hidden spaces. So I think we have to start there. I think that transparency, a sort of a radical transparency of seeing underneath the hood and really understanding that this is sort of eye-watering amounts of material that kids are being not seen. And I think this is one of the things, not seen, being pushed, recommended, notified, suggested. And I think that is the key takeaway from this, because the online safety bill is an opportunity to say, hey, your products are chasing kids. Your products are designed to push kids into these places. That is actually a question of product safety, not freedom of speech.
So briefly, what will the online safety bill do to stop that?
I think it'll bring in risk assessment, it'll bring in mitigation measures, it'll bring in enforcement of companies to say, have you had a look? Have you considered kids? And what have you done about it?
Fraser Nelson, when you hear Molly Russell's father talk about his daughter's online life, he talked about it as the bleakest of worlds. She was trapped in despair, that the coroner ruled the material she was viewing was just not safe. You accept, presumably, something does need to change.
Yes, to me it sounds like if there are videos glorifying self-harm, glorifying suicide, they should not be legal. They should be banned. The law should stop them happening. What we heard about seemed to be an incredible abuse of power by Facebook. They weren't even going along with the inquest trying to find out what's happening. So I'm not quite sure by what method that was allowed to be seen. It should be against the law, and if not, the law needs to change to make it. But the problem is, when the politicians say they want to remove something like this, which everybody would agree it should not be seen by children and should not even be legal. But what the government wants to do is to come up with a new phrase, legal but harmful, and use that basically as a censorship clause that would cover a whole bunch of things. Nadine Dorries, when she was promoting this bill, even mentioned the jokes of Jimmy Carr as something which might be harmful and fall under the power of the bill. So the danger here is that in an attempt to do something which is obviously urgent and very important, which is to make it illegal for social media companies to show anything like this material to anybody, let alone teenagers, that becomes something else, the creating a censorship clause that the government would impose at will and without any real scrutiny.
Baroness Kidron, I mean, is it a fair point? You know, the material Molly was viewing was on the whole legal, clearly very harmful to her. That is complicated, isn't it?
I think we have to separate out a couple of things. First of all, there are some things that the bill brings in and says, these are illegal outside of online settings. They must also be illegal. And to that point, I agree absolutely with Fraser. I think the other thing that I really have to say is that the children's safety duties in the bill are quite separate from this unfortunate phrase, which I also object to, of illegal but harmful. And I think that what we have to look at is see what role are the tech companies playing in abusing our children, and make sure that we have enough law, because, Fraser, at the moment we don't have enough law to take them, to hold them to account, and to make sure that they don't show that, and what's more, don't push that at our kids.
Fraser Nelson, I mean, the point about legal but harmful leaves the question who decides and who monitors and sanctions the tech companies.
That's right. It's a terrifyingly ill-defined definition, and the government bill would allow legal but harmful to be defined by pretty much anybody. The Secretary of State can define that any way that they want, and they can include it to mean any sort of political view that they don't agree with. That's why this bill cannot proceed as planned, and that's why I'm very glad it's been paused and why it should be rewritten. It shouldn't be beyond the wit of Parliament to separate from the idea of things that shouldn't be legal at all. The promotion of suicide should not be legal. the same with terrorism, the same with a whole bunch of other things. But I think the categories need to be either it's legal or it's not. And so I think the emphasis should be on making sure that what we've just heard about today is legal and social media companies are punished, and not use this as a means of giving government a tool to censor a whole bunch of other things without any real democratic debate on what the limits of those government censorship power should be.
Fraser will have no argument from me about government powers and about creating.
But how do you get that balance right
You
between
do.
freedom of speech and protecting children?
Well, I think you have to look at it this way. If a child goes on and says, I want to do an exercise routine, but within 15 clicks, they're being shown, pro-Anna, material.
For pro-anorexia, or promoting anorexia.
Then you've got to say, hang on a minute, why is that journey legal? And I think the online safety bill, as regards children, has to deal with that. It has to deal with the journey that children are pushed on, not the individual pieces of
Baroness
content.
Kidron and Fraser Nelson, I'm really sorry, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you very much for discussing this with us today. And if you've been affected by any of the issues just raised, you can seek help by going to channel4.com/support.